This is the SFFaudio podcast. Hey, I'm Scott.
Hey, this is Jesse.
Good morning, Jesse. How's it going today?
I'm doing okay. And yourself?
Hanging in there. I'm doing fine.
Good.
Doing fine. Hey, we picked up Wall-E. Have you seen the movie Wall-E? You saw the movie Wall-E. That was a famous post on SFFaudio.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you know there's people that don't like that movie?
Why don't they like it?
I have no idea. Well, actually, I guess I do. They said there's not enough talking.
I was about to swear.
Yeah, I brought it up at work. I said, "Oh man, yeah, we're gonna watch Wall-E tonight. I'm kind of excited." And people said, "You know that movie stinks." And I was like, "What? How can you not like that movie?"
Have you watched it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Is there enough time?
Yeah, we saw it. We saw it at the theater. Yeah. Oh, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was excellent.
It's more like a silent film for the first 45 minutes, or a big nature film with no talk.
Yeah, which is it's really amazing, what they pull off without any words. I thought that was neat to watch, not a detriment,
Absolutely.
So, thumbs up.
I mean, in a way, I find it kind of heartbreaking that they had to, enter in with all the humans doing their jibber jabber.
Yeah, you know what? They could have gone without that the whole movie. That
I mean, yeah, the film sort of breaks down, I think, after it starts visiting the humans, but it in the end it still works. But the first half of the movie is far superior to the second half.
Right.
It's still an excellent movie, but.
Yeah, on excuse me, Thanksgiving Day, which was Thursday down here in the United States, we after we had our big family dinner and everything, we decided to go see a movie. We went to the 7 o'clock show down in Logan, and Trish and Chris went and saw Twilight.
Okay.
And Alex and I went and saw Bolt, which is another animated Disney movie.
It's not a Pixar movie, though, is it?
It's not Pixar.
No.
It's not Pixar, but I was really pleasantly surprised. I didn't have high hopes for it, but it was really, really good.
It's about
the animation was really quite excellent. Yeah, it's about a dog who's on a TV show. He plays a superhero dog on a TV show, but in order to get the correct emotions out of the dog, the handlers have decided that they need to convince the dog that he is a superhero, and they treat him like that all the time. And of course the dog gets away because he thinks this girl is in trouble, and now he's out in the real world and he thinks he's a superhero dog, but he isn't.
It's like the Truman Show for a dog or something.
Yeah, kind of like. Yep. But thumbs up. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah, and Alex absolutely loved it. She can't wait to see it again. So, like again. Alex is 8 years old, by the way.
Yeah, kids seem to be able to experience great joy in repetition. And I find myself not interested in repeating the experiences of movies over and over again. I think that that's just something to do with age, but I know that some adults seem to enjoy reading the same book over and over and over and over and over and over again. I think that's a big mistake.
Yeah, especially when there's so much out there. My goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of bad stuff too, but I think if you do your research, like beforehand, you actually do the research, making sure that this is going to be something you're interested in. Read the reviews.
Yep.
So.
For certain. All right.
When you were watching Wall-E, did you notice the things that I mentioned in my post?
I sure did. Yeah. In fact, that was kind of fun to watch it again. Noticing that specifically. So, But yeah, he was a pirate.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like he's evil, though, right?
No, it doesn't seem like he's evil. He did. He copied the music onto himself and took it with him, really.
And then shared it with his friend.
And shared it with his friends. Yeah, that was a great post.
Yeah.
Make sure you post back to that post with this one. Cause,
okay, yeah.
That was great. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Everybody, if you're not familiar with that post, it's very much worth a read.
Yeah, I got a lot of heat from a lot of Spanish websites for writing it up. They thought I was attacking the movie, but somebody did point out, and I'm not sure who it was, but somebody pointed out that I am wrong about one of the aspects on the list. I had said that he copied it to his iPod, and then that's format shifting. And technically, that's not true because he uses a VCR to play the tape, and the tape goes to an iPod screen, but it's directly playing on the iPod screen as opposed to being transferred like to a. He's basically just bypassed the iPod for only purposes of using its monitor.
Right. Right.
So technically, that's not one of the violations of the Canadian bill. But what's kind of interesting is that our government, our minority government that was trying to bring in this bill, Bill C-61, got reelected with a slightly larger minority, and now it looks like there's a chance that they're gonna be taken down as a ruling minority by a coalition of all the other parties.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I don't know how long that'll last, but it may prevent a rehash of slightly watered down Bill 61. So,
yep,
still fighting the fight.
Gotcha. All right, what else have we got today?
Did you read Brian's review of the Halloween Tree?
I sure did. Yeah, it was a great review. Yeah.
Did you happen to hear
the
this
Halloween
one?
tree? The Halloween, yeah, I actually did. The Halloween Tree that he's referring to is a 2-hour audio drama version of the Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, and recently reviewed on our site.
What did you think of the production?
Well, I had mixed feelings about it because the Halloween Tree is one of those things that we watch every year. It's a movie, and the movie is darn near perfect in my opinion. So because that's ingrained in my head, it would be like I don't know, watching Star Trek with other actors. You know what I'm saying? It's ingrained in my head. Okay. So when I hear it, I'm just like, oh, that's not as good, or oh, that's interesting how they did that. That's how I was listening to it. It was hard for me to accept the story. So I was glad that Brian wanted to review it. And yeah, I don't disagree with his review in any way.
I like his style of approaching it. It's very meditative, you know. He's really into dissecting the story, and doesn't actually talk that much about the production until quite far into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that review. He's a good writer.
Yeah, he is. That's for certain. See, this week I finished Poe's Children. Right. Which is an audiobook anthology. Now I noticed that well, it says unabridged selections on it, but I noticed that when I was in the bookstore, I took a look at the hardcover, and there are several stories that aren't in there. You know, at least a third of them. You know, there's Neil Gaiman's story that's not on the audio version.
What?
And, yeah, seriously.
Oh, that is stupid, man. Taking out Neil Gaiman's story?
I wonder why.
Oh, that sucks. Maybe they'll come out with Volume 2. Seriously.
I don't know. I don't know if they will.
Well, they did that with the Legends series. I believe they still left
did.
out a lot of stuff. But
yeah, they did. Yeah.
That sucks. If maybe Audible could do the completely unabridged version, that'd make me happy.
Yeah, maybe they could.
Or maybe the Neil Gaiman rights weren't available for some reason.
Yeah, that's possible too. I mean, it could be in one of his other, like Fragile Things or something.
Richard K. Morgan, you never read anything by him?
I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, I really like his writing.
I know you like him.
Yeah. He's a little long-winded, which is kind of the standard of the day for novels. Tell him again, tell him some more. Make sure you wring every last drop of conversation out. Yeah, he's a really good interview. Very interesting. Talks about the science fiction conference they went to in France, in which the French, William Gibson, Richard K. Morgan, and a French minister for technology and culture were all on the same panel. And just how it doesn't always work to get politicians on a panel with science fiction authors. Really quite interesting.
Well, good. Yeah, you mentioned interviews, and I just called up here on my screen, Hour 25. Man, I love that show. But it's just updated so infrequently now that I don't check it very often. But they did have an update on October 31st, it says.
Yeah, the Halloween show, and they do a Christmas show and a Halloween show. That's their weekly show,
Yeah. But, if you want a nice archive of really good interviews, this is a good site to go to. It's Hour 25 online. 25 is 25, online.com.
So what do they have in their Halloween readings this year? Goblin Market by Christiana Rossetti. An Adventure of the Deep Waters by William Hope Hodgson. That's an old one. That should be a public domain story. Yeah, that's good. I wish they really would update more. I don't know why it takes them so long.
Yeah, and I don't know why they don't either, and I also don't know why they don't podcast. It's they're still just streaming their audio.
It's I hate to say this, but I think it's just old people get stuck in their ways. And I'm not trying to put down anybody. I'm just saying, dude, podcasting has been around for a long time. I know your show predates podcasting, but you're still, they're still releasing it through a real audio.
Really?
Sorry, it's not a real audio. It's an M3U, which is just a string of short MP3 files. But the MP3 files are not directly accessible. So somebody actually
could download it.
You can download it, but you have to. What you have to do is it took me a while to figure out how to do this. What you have to do is you download the M3U. You open it up with a TXT. you just change the. You just drag and drop it into a TXT program, and then inside that there's a list of the MP3s directly findable, but they're not all one big file. So you could podcast the show, but it would end up being a whole bunch of 1 minute, 2 minute, and half-hour bits. And the thing is they don't even have to be you could make your own podcast for the show. If you fiddled around with it, but it's just so much of a hassle. Somebody was complaining about a recent new audio magazine from Australia earlier this week. Charles Tan posted a story about a new magazine called Terra Incognita, Australian speculative fiction podcast. Has a new podcast called Coeur de Lion, and he posted it up just with their podcast feed, which was a little bit hard, and then two people did like really frustrated complaints. I added a direct link to the MP3 download after doing a page search of their server. But yeah, they didn't even have a direct download link. And the author saying, sorry about this. I am not familiar with podcasting so far, and it's just I mean, it's kind of sad that I have to do all the that kind of search to find out stuff. But
yeah,
it's funny. A lot of websites that say they claim to be a podcast, they have MP3 files, but they don't have it as an RSS feed for it, and that's not a podcast. That's just an MP3.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah.
Wow. Hopefully things are, technology's making it easier. Podcasting used to be more difficult. Now, hey, we're doing it. Can't be that hard, right?
That's for sure. That is for certain. Now you want to talk about Poe's Children a little more?
Yeah.
Okay. Now Poe's Children. No, I wrote that up for the Fix, and the column will be up on the Fix. I'm guessing tomorrow or the next day.
You got to post a link, man.
I will. I'll do a link. But yeah, it is missing. I'm just looking at the table of contents now of the hardcover, and let's see. There's a story by Jonathan Carroll, and it's got to be almost a third of the stories. But October in the Chair by Neil Gaiman is in the hardcover, but not in the audiobook. So for whatever reasons, there's about a third of the stories. But the anthology is interesting to me because Straub writes a really nice introduction in which he says that there's a group of writers that have more in common with themselves than they do with the people who are supposed to be defining the genre. And he doesn't really give them a name, but he just says that they're literary, categorize them or whatever. But
yeah, I think he does give them a name, Scott. It's called Poe's Children.
Poe's Children, yeah. I guess. But he says that they're literary writers and genre writers at the same time. And I kind of saw a parallel, with... There was an anthology that came out a while back called a Slipstream anthology. It was James Patrick Kelly and John Kessel edited one called Feeling Very Strange.
Yeah.
And it was filled with stories that they called Slipstream.
Right.
Well, a couple of the authors are the same. M. Rickert and Kelly Link have stories in both. But it just seems to me that they're drawn from the same pool of writers.
Yeah,
and it's the same kind of a thing.
Yeah, literary writers, I get it.
Yeah, but you know how Stephen King... Well, I don't know. You don't keep up with him, I don't think.
No,
but Stephen King's writing over the years has become, I would call it more and more literary. But I don't know that I use the word literary correctly, and I'm trying to figure that out right now. Because literary, I think that I'm using literary and mainstream as interchangeable terms, and they're really not.
Well, they can be.
Literary would be more of a stylistic thing, wouldn't it?
Well, I'll tell you, Canadian fiction, which is actually a genre, which is bloody bizarre, is basically what you're talking about, literary fiction. Popular fiction, like the bestsellers you find at the supermarket, those are not literary. For the most part, they are... they're the Oprah books. Okay? Now, Oprah books can be literary, but popular books don't have to be.
Okay, so if you think about it that way, so literary is its own genre, right?
Yeah, it's basically... I find literary fiction to be really annoying because it uses a lot of tricks of writing to make you care about the writing itself and not care about the story. So you can tell any kind of story as literary fiction, and often it's fake science fiction. It has it's basically what I would call a Margaret Atwood style of science fiction. Margaret Atwood has written one science fiction novel and a lot of literary fiction, and her one science fiction novel is very literary, but she's written a lot of fiction that includes science fictional elements. And it's basically, it's good writing. It's just it's like some ways it's like masturbatory writing. It's pointless. It has no ideas at its central core, or if there are ideas, they're not strongly at the fore. It's the style of the writing that's strongly at the fore.
So that's what you'd call literary work.
Yeah,
is where the style is at the forefront and the ideas are in the back.
The ideas are almost unimportant.
Okay, so I'd agree with that in some of these stories in Poe's Children. I love the stories. I thought it was a wonderful anthology. I mean, listening to it on audio was particularly excellent because you know how you usually have stories in an anthology that are really hard to get through. I don't know if you're like me, but I've started one over and over and over because I lose it. My mind goes somewhere else or whatever. Anyway, these were all insistent good stories, on audio.
Okay.
The readers were really good, but I didn't have any trouble keeping up with any one of them. But the stories are, in a way, the horror elements are a little bit not as much in the front. Okay, and that's what I was making the point about Stephen King. I mean, Stephen King's books have always been about the characters, and almost the horror is almost secondary. The horror is stuff that happens to the characters.
Right.
It's not always about the horror. And
Okay.
if you question that, just read some of his endings, because it's the horror as a vehicle for the characters to run around in, and he doesn't usually, I don't think, come up with his ending until he figures he has to stop.
Okay.
So a lot of his endings are not satisfying.
But character pieces can be literary.
Yeah, well, I think so. What about Orson Scott Card? If you look at Orson Scott Card, he is very much a character-oriented thing.
Yeah.
When he wrote Ender's Game, for example, that is not a book that's brimming with new science fiction ideas. It's a story that's set in a science fictional universe.
It actually does have that drive. It does have that drive, but it almost feels absent. He does have an underlying theme that's underneath all that. Basically, it's a noir theme. You have to trick people to get the best from them in some cases. What's
Right.
going on in there.
Okay, but that's not a science fictional idea.
Yeah, it's not
So
super
I mean,
science
my point is that I feel that he led a sort of movement in the 80s that kind of started to push things, but before Orson Scott Card, now I don't know that he's the exact one, but he was there. But before Orson Scott Card, you could have idea-driven stories with practically zero character, and people would be satisfied with that. And then after Orson Scott Card, now the story and the character is just as important as the idea. Would you disagree with that?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So anyway, I mean that's just the way I feel about it. But we've talked before on this podcast how mainstream writers are writing science fiction. Like Margaret Atwood, like Michael Chabon, the guy I just read, Selden Edwards. We've brought him up a couple times. These are mainstream writers, and that's the word I'm using, is mainstream instead of literary, because a mainstream novel is what you're talking about. That doesn't take anything to get into. There's no style to get by to read a mainstream novel, right? You can come to a mainstream novel as long as you can read. You can read a mainstream novel, and there's no baggage on it where you have to decipher anything. That's a mainstream novel.
I think the big problem with calling something a mainstream novel is that writing is not mainstream. People don't read. Most people do not read books. Most people don't read books. So even like if there is a mainstream movement of reading, Science fiction is the top genre. Mystery is the second highest genre, right? But you put those two together, and there's still a significant portion of the population that do not read those, of readers. But if you take the mainstream of society, they're still not reading. They'll might read the newspaper occasionally. They'll read for work. But, they don't read books.
I've heard the term used, mainstream, just being a general bestseller. Like, okay, let's take Michael Crichton.
Right.
Okay, what would you call him?
Well, a techno thriller.
I would call him a mainstream writer.
Basically, he came up with his own subgenre called the techno thriller, which is like science fiction without a care for the actual. Did you read that? Yeah, like that. James Wallace Harris post about science fiction being his religion, in a way.
Yeah.
Right. He was saying that there's a bunch of different motives for reading. When you read a Michael Crichton novel, at least later in his career, it doesn't feel like a science fiction novel, even though it has a lot of science fictional trappings. It feels like its own little thing, and so he's got that techno thriller label.
Okay, well that's not unlike what these stories are like in Poe's Children.
Okay.
I don't know, I mean, like I said, Straub calls them literary. They're not all stylistic, though. So that's why I was wondering if I was using...
Well, I think Neil Gaiman is literary.
Because it's almost like a mainstream, if you let me use the word mainstream,
okay,
to describe general fiction. If it's more a mix of mainstream fiction and horror fiction in a way that the horror is there, but the story is mainstream. So we're talking about a couple that's divorced and they're going through all this stuff, and then the horror appears.
Okay.
So again, it's almost like something that's happening to them, but it's not a story really about the horror. But I wouldn't call them overly stylistic either. They're really good stories. And maybe the difference between mainstream and literary is that they're good.
I gotta ask you what you mean by good, though. What do you mean by good?
Them. I liked them.
Yeah.
How's that?
Why did you like them?
Because they were engaging stories. The characters were people that I identified with and cared about, and I was interested in what the resolution was going to be.
Yeah. It could be right. I'm not sure the answer to your question. I don't read a lot of the mainstream books. One that I liked that was not that many years ago, about 10 years ago, A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's a big, long novel about, it's basically the story of a guy, an American, he's like a businessman, and it's about his life and sort of the way it's falling apart and coming together, that sort of thing. It's mainstream, it's literary, but mostly it's good. So I think it's that writing can be good. And that you can forgive its lack of ideas if the ideas are, if it's repackaged stuff, if it's repackaged modernity, I have no problem with that, as long as it's good writing. But with science fiction, if it has good ideas and it's hard to, the writing's not so good, it can still be a good book.
Sure.
You can say there was something of value here because it came up with new takes on old stuff. I was telling you I was listening to Starship, the Starship series by
Resnick.
Mike Resnick, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about how you were saying you were excited to get it and start listening to the new Star Wars book. And I was thinking, well, I'm not really into listening to the Star Wars book, but this is basically a Star Wars book. It's just set in his own universe. And what I mean by that is there really are no new science fictional ideas at all. It's a space opera with a whole bunch of characters, and every time there's a scenario in which, you know, you could introduce this new interesting technology that, you know, that have been introduced over the years, nanotech, you know, force fields, anything that, you know, here's a chance for him to come up with something new that has not been in every space opera book ever before. He never does it. He never takes that opportunity to add in something new. And so it feels like there's nothing new in the technology. But because Mike Resnick writes a really compelling story, he's got great characters, his writing's fast and fun, you know, like he just knows how to write well. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I really don't feel like it's hard. And it's not hard science fiction for sure, but it hardly feels like science fiction. It feels like a Star Wars book. You know, it's got a big space empire and pirates and, you know, space stations and robots, or semi-robots, lots of aliens. But it you know, it just doesn't feel like a science fiction book. It doesn't have any, you know, I talk about, I was going to say Benford, but that's not right. Guy who wrote the Uplift series, Startide Rising.
David Brin.
David Brin. Okay, David Brin, I really dislike the way he writes, at least Startide Rising bothered the hell out of me. But it's got science fiction ideas in it that are not found in every other book, you know, of that genre. And for that, I appreciate his contributions, but there's nothing. You know, it's horrible to listen to. It's horrible to read. It's just boring as hell because he doesn't construct it properly. But Mike Resnick's not doing any of the idea stuff, and I'm still enjoying it. So, but I know that I can't have just a steady diet of that. I need to have some more ideas added in. It can be ideas from history, you know, telling me things I didn't know before, or ideas from sociology or whatever study that you're interested in. As long as you entertain me, I'm happy. And the mainstream label, the literary label, doesn't matter to me so much as that you're telling me something interesting or you're telling it well. I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to expand on that on what he's saying something in that introduction.
Yeah.
And I don't,
yeah, and it's still, you know, as reviewers, you know, we try to describe what a book is to a reader, right?
Right.
And I think that's why we come up with these categories as a way to describe the book in a short amount of time. You know, we don't want to. Yeah, it's just a category.
Yep.
So, you know, it does interest me, you know, how they're categorizing them, and it's interesting to me that there's a movement in which inside science fiction there seems to be, well, there is a group of writers that are writing in a more general fiction kind of way. And there are a lot of general fiction writers that are writing in a more science fiction kind of way.
Well,
that's interesting to me.
Do you remember you said there was a Kelly Link story in there? Kelly Link is the least accessible science fiction or fantasy author I've ever come across of the new breed of, you know, people in the last 10 years or so. I find her stuff completely impenetrable. It's almost
Really?
dense to the point where I'm like, I'm trying to find a way in, and it's, well, there's writing here, and I can tell that a lot of effort was put into it, but as to following the story and accessing the characters emotionally, it just doesn't do. Somehow I can't penetrate it. So she might be literary, but is she mainstream? I don't know.
Yeah, see, now there's the word again. Yeah, is she literary, or, and I use the word mainstream again to describe general fiction. It's not that the writing's not good. It's just that the focus of the writing is not on the science fiction idea. It's on the characters and what's happening to them and how they're feeling and their motivations. And these are full people in the stories.
It's kind of like where William Gibson has gone. He started off as hardcore science fiction. Now he's mainstream.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, every one of these Post-Children stories, every single one of them is extremely well written. I don't want to give the impression, when you use the word mainstream, that's not what I mean. So maybe that's literary is mainstream topics but written well.
Yeah, but just maybe. Because they're literary doesn't mean they're written well. Literary is more like self-conscious of literature.
Right. So that's the style thing. Like,
so
if you use the word literary to mean style, then is Charles Stross a literary science fiction writer? Because he's not a guy that you can give to a brand new science fiction reader and say, here, read this story and you'll love it.
No.
Charles Stross is for people who read science fiction.
Connoisseurs.
Well, yeah. Exactly.
I see what you're saying.
Line, right? So would he be called a literary science fiction writer?
Well, I think that
he's doing the style.
I think that the problem with this is a problem with any art form. It becomes more and more difficult for people to understand if they're not educated from the ground up, from the origins. So painting, right? Modern painting, modern art doesn't make sense to a lot of people. There's a big painting in the National Gallery of Canada. It's just a big orange stripe on a blue field, and it's the government institution paid more than $1 million for it, and people are really upset.
I'm one of those people that don't understand it.
Right, and right. I sympathize with you, but on the other hand, I know that there is an evolution. Art didn't start in that position, and if you were following art from the beginning, painting from the beginning, it has its roots in the 16th century, the 15th century, right? There's been an evolution, and as those styles have come along and come and gone, there's been a transition between, once photography comes in, this has a hugely profound effect on what art is. Why are people painting? The Impressionist movement, people understand this. They say, "Oh, it's still people," and you just get an impression of what's going on, right? So a lot of people's understanding of modern art ends at the 19th century. It ends at the 19th century. It's because there's a progressive storytelling within art itself. What can we do? How can we do it? What movements are happening? How are they getting along? It's why old people don't like modern kids' music. It's because they haven't been paying attention to the entire development of music as it's been going. Funk leads into soul, and funk lead into rap. Really? Well, yes, they do. Right? How does this work? Well, it happens. People come up with ideas, and they explore them. Other people pick up on them and develop it, right? And eventually, at some point, people will just stop paying attention to this subgenre of culture, and then they become unable to relate. And so, I don't understand modern painting, but I understand that some people think they do, and that seems to be enough for them. You can't give Charles Stross to a lot of people as their first book, but when we try and convert people to our semi-religion of science fiction, say this is a really good thing, you'll like it. We don't start by giving them Charles Stross. We start by giving them Heinlein.
Right.
We start by giving them Ray Bradbury.
You think that'll continue? You think in 20 years we'll still be giving them Heinleins, or will we be giving them someone else?
There's other people. I just gave a bunch of kids Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book.
Oh, cool.
And that's a lot more beneficial to them than trying to, teach them something that's more dated in style. So I had a hell of a time trying to get the kids interested in Call of the Wild. Call of the Wild is completely accessible, but it's got a lot of old-fashioned words. Neil Gaiman uses old-fashioned words, but only sparingly. And so he's more accessible. Call of the Wild is still accessible, but you have to have sort of an older vocabulary. There's not a lot of dialogue in Call of the Wild. It's mostly long passages of description and thoughts and stuff like that, and that's not true of the Graveyard Book.
Right.
So different, they're already exposed. When I say what book are we doing next, when they're saying Goosebumps, and I said that's not a book, that's a series. Goosebumps, or they want to read something they've read before, because kids like to watch the same thing over and over. They like to read the same thing over and over. They get a lot of value out of repetition because they're still extracting information from it the second time and the third time. Right.
Wow.
Watching Wall-E for the second time for me is gonna take out. I'm not gonna come away with deeper insights. Whereas the kids do.
Well, that's true. You'd notice a lot of different stuff.
I don't.
I do. Yeah. Of course, when you have kids, you end up watching. If you watch with them, then you end up watching things over and over.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of Neil Gaiman, I noticed this on his blog, and I just popped it up to make sure I was right. But it says here that he's running. It's not really a contest, but if you do something to get people reading Graveyard Book, which is what you've done, you can get a signed poster.
Hey, I'm gonna
go to
do that.
neilgaiman.com.
I will. I'm also trying to other value I'm trying to instill in children. Trying to convert them to my religion. In this particular case, let me tell you about my religion, okay? It's the religion that treats books reverently instead of like garbage, which is how most children treat their books, is like garbage. And the way I did this was I'm telling them, don't spill food on your book. Don't do this to your book. Don't do that to your book. And the way I convinced them, I said, listen, if Neil Gaiman comes to town, you can take your book and get it signed by him, and that'll be worth lots of money. And they say, lots of money, and I said, yep, lots of money. And I showed them signed copies on eBay, and they're all excited, right? Now, this has not kept them from hurting their books a little bit, but they're not quite as damaged as they would be. When I'm done with a book, it looks like it hasn't been read.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So that's my, treat things nicely.
You bet.
Well, they last longer. I don't know.
They last longer, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
Okay. All right. Should we wrap it up?
No,
go ahead.
I got a couple other bits of news. There was a lot of people interested in Johnny Chase. This is a CBC radio series from late 70s, early 80s. It's largely available through the Zombie Astronauts website, his blog. He's posted a number of episodes from this series, and he may be posting more in the future. So that's kind of important. We got a lot of people visiting the site looking just for this show a while ago. The other thing, I posted a review of Queen of the Black Coast, the audio drama.
Oh, yeah.
And I was feeling a little self-conscious about putting the essential post on this. Not because I don't think it deserves it, but I was reading Brian's review of the Halloween Tree. This is another audio drama came out this week. I'm giving an essential to Queen of the Black Coast, and Brian said, it's not really essential worthy of the Halloween Tree. And it's kind of like the discussions we've had about the difference between amateur and professional audio drama. And I mean, there are occasionally problems in the audio drama of Queen of the Black Coast, in that the actors are not all in the same room. When they're recording, they're not interacting with each other. They're interacting with the script only, and then it's the editor's job to try and make them sound as natural as they can, being recorded separately. But I still feel after thinking about it, I still feel quite fine with that. The Colonial Radio Theatre is a bunch of people in the same room recording. And they have, they're getting paid to do that. Bill Holwig's people are not getting paid to do it. They're doing it for love. But I still, I don't see a better version coming anytime soon. It's really, really good. Have a listen to it. I've posted a
I do want to. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. I'll get that down.
It might be a good idea to read the story first. It's available public domain, so.
Okay. Yeah, and I've never read a Conan story.
It's a good one.
I must. Good.
It's a really good one. And it's fairly accessible, too.
This has been the SFF Audio Podcast. Please join us at www.sffaudio.com.